Hey everybody, welcome back to an all-new episode of 10 to Life with me, Annie Elise. I am ready to talk true crime with you today. Are you ready? I'm ready. Are you ready? I'm ready. You might want to grab your box of tissues. If you are cleaning your bathroom, you may want to get an extra Clorox squirty thing to shoot in there so you can scrub the shit out of your tub. And if you're driving, focus on the road, maybe put this on pause, I don't know, because today's case is especially upsetting because it involves the death of a young teenage girl named Lexi. Her family said that she had the ability to change the world. They compared her to a literal shining star. But as unfortunately as we hear so often, when Lexi started hanging out with some questionable people, her life suddenly took a very dark turn. And she suddenly disappeared, and people questioned, did she run away? Did something happen? For weeks, police received no answers. But then a very helpful tip would uncover a truly gruesome story. This one is very tough, so like I said, no matter what you're doing, you're probably going to be working out some aggression. But we're in it together, guys. So let's jump right in. Alright guys, so if you have watched this show before, you have probably heard me rave about Beam Dream. Like a lot of people, I used to struggle with poor sleep and I always felt tired throughout the day, and I never really realized how much it was affecting my life until I was able to actually start getting amazing sleep thanks to Beam. My husband first introduced it to me about a year ago now. I drink it every single night religiously. They're also now a partner of the channel because I love it so much. I've gotten all my friends and family hooked on it, and so many of you guys even came up to me at CrimeCon saying how obsessed you are with it now, how it helped you sleep, how it helped your husband sleep, and it just makes me so happy. And when they reached out to me to do a custom flavor, I literally jumped at the chance. So I have officially partnered with them to create an exclusive flavor of their best-selling sleep blend. It pairs two of my favorite flavors together, creamy caramel and salted chocolate, and it literally tastes like this sweet, salty dessert, and the best part is it's only 15 calories. There's also no added sugar, so there's no guilt. It's this perfect sweet treat right before bed. It's the best. I drink it 30 minutes before I want to be asleep, and it is like poof magic. Plus, there's no grogginess the next morning like you get with other sleep aids because they use all natural ingredients. And today I have such a special perk for all of you listeners because for a limited time, you can get up to 40% off when you try my limited edition flavor. So guys, now is your time if you haven't tried it yet, but I am telling you, order soon because there is a limited supply of my exclusive salty chocolate caramel dream. It is so good, guys. Just click the link below or scan the QR code and use code 10TOLIFE before it sells out. I hope you guys love it as much as I do. I know you will, and sweet dreams. In 2011, Alexis, otherwise known as Alexis Rasmussen, was 16 years old. Alexis lived with her parents and her 3 siblings in Ogden, Utah. Ogden is a very picturesque, mid-sized town just north of Salt Lake City. Growing up, Lexi was close with her family, and she really considered her brother her best friend. Lexi had long blonde hair, big green eyes, she always had a smile on her face, and she was just a happy person. She was always optimistic, outgoing, and she just wanted to have a good time. She was known to make friends easily as well, and she could get along with most people that she was introduced to. She was also kind of considered your scene kid. I don't know if I'm dating myself with that language, but it's somebody who has a very particular sense of style. Somebody maybe with colorful hair or dark hair, side-swept bangs, piercings, dark eye makeup, bright clothing or dark clothing, lots of bracelets, that kind of thing. You also might hear them described as an emo kid, a scenester. I was definitely an emo kid growing up. I had my septum pierced. I had the jet black hair. I was mad at the world. I mean, you get it. But Lexi, she embraced all of this. She was always styling her hair in different ways, coloring it different colors. She had big gauges in her ears, which those are the holes when you see them. She had her lip pierced twice, and she was always taking pictures of herself and her friends to post on her MySpace page and Facebook page. And if you don't know what MySpace is, honestly, just bury me in the ground at this point because that will make me feel like a dinosaur. It was the precursor to Facebook, and it's where you took the pictures like this from this angle. or like honestly, that's what it was. It was super cringe. We also had to like HTML code, I think that's what you call it, all of the things on the page to build it yourself. How we all knew how to code internet things back then, I don't know, but we like figured out how to do it where you'd have a custom song playing, all the colors. Okay, this isn't a video about MySpace, but it's just bringing back all the nostalgia things for me. And so overall, Lexi was a very free-spirited person, and she was also very confident, guys. She was never afraid to let her true self just shine through. She was known to burst out singing, she loved to create, and she was really interested in any kind of art that there was. She was always making something. But at the same time, Lexi was still a teenager, and she was figuring life out. Like most teenagers, she wasn't too sure where she was going to fit in the world, and that led her down a very difficult path. Lexi's family said that she was the type of person who always learned lessons the hard way. As a teenager, she ended up becoming friends with people who weren't the best influences. They'd get in trouble at school, they would experiment with drugs, with alcohol, and Lexi even ran away a few times. Well, she would say that she was going to run away, but then she would just spend multiple nights over at a friend's house and eventually come home. But to a point, experimenting with substances and getting into some trouble is just typical teenage behavior. I'm sure many of us did stuff like that when we were that age. I know I certainly did. It almost was kind of to be expected. But with Lexi, things got pretty intense. Lexi had a friend named Brenna who lived across the street from a family called the Millerbergs. And Eric and Dia Millerberg were notorious in this neighborhood. They were notorious, in fact, for selling drugs. I mean, they had a constant stream of people going in and out of their house, and it wasn't even like they were being secretive about it. I mean, the couple was a little scary too. Eric had tattoos all over his body. He was pretty big. Both Dia and Eric looked strung out most of the time. Their house was a complete mess, the lawn was never mowed, and people saw the couple screaming at each other constantly. One neighbor even remembers Eric threatening to hit Dia with a metal pipe. They would drive recklessly up and down the road, they were always screaming, always fighting, and clearly they had a lot of domestic issues. The neighbors called the cops on them a few times, but it never caused anything to change. So the neighbors decided they didn't want to get involved in this whole mess. They just wanted to kind of like let this couple be, for the most part, that is. But unfortunately, the biggest customer base for the Millerbergs were teenagers. Erica and Dia were both in their late 30s, but they were constantly seen with teenagers at their house. They would throw these parties, and everybody there would be a teenager, except them, which I just gotta say, whether you're in the drug business or whatever business, that is beyond creepy. How weird is it that somebody in their 30s is just hanging out with all these teenagers, throwing parties, pushing product to these kids? Like, you're gross. You're gross, gross, gross. You are a predator in every sense of the word. Not sexual, but you get what I mean. Like, we have no business hanging out with a teenager. No. Okay. And so basically, Brenna told Lexi about Eric and Dia, saying, hey, you're never going to guess who my neighbors are. They sell drugs. They have all these parties. And Lexi ended up becoming one of their biggest customers in all of this. First, Lexi started buying weed, started buying alcohol from them just from time to time. But then she started spending more and more time with this couple at their house. And neighbors saw Lexi at their house all the time. By the spring of 2011, Lexi and Dia were very close, almost like they were becoming best friends. They would smoke weed together, they would drink, and Lexi would also sometimes help Dia take care of her kids, which you actually heard that right. Eric and Dia actually had 2 daughters, a 9-month-old and a 6-year-old. So they had 2 small children in this house where people were buying drugs, going in and out. They were even throwing these massive parties on the weekend with the kids inside the house. I mean, talk about an unsafe environment, right? Now, eventually, Dia asked Lexi if she was interested in babysitting so that she and Eric could go out. They could go do their thing, private time, rage, whatever they wanted to do. And Lexi was always interested in making a little bit of money, so she said yes. And she ended up babysitting for them a few times. In September 2011, Dia asked Lexi if she could babysit one evening so that she and Eric could go out and get decorations for their daughter's upcoming birthday. Lexi agreed, and on Saturday, September 10th, she made her way over to the Millerbergs' house. Now, throughout the night, Lexi was texting with her mom, Dawn, and everything seemed normal. At one point, Lexi told her mom that Eric and Dia came home, they dropped some things off, but then they wanted to continue their date night, so they left again, or they were going to be leaving again soon. Around 11:30 p.m., Lexi told her mom that Eric and Dia had left again and that they weren't going to be home now for a while. So Dawn just told her, spend the night at the house. I mean, it would be really late by the time that Eric and Dia get back, so Lexi, you should just sleep there, come home in the morning. Which, I understand that she was babysitting late, and I remember when I was younger, when I had little babysitting gigs, sometimes I would sleep there or sleep on the couch until they got home. But given everything else we know about this couple, it just felt off. Maybe not the most safe idea for Lexi to be sleeping over at that house, right? But again, I remember when this was all too common. That was also back in the day where you would get literally a 12-year-old to babysit your newborn. I was the 12-year-old who was babysitting, and I would get paid $5 an hour. Times were raging back then. But you get what I mean. It just still didn't feel like the most safe recipe set up here, and probably wouldn't fly today. How many of you did that? But then Dawn sent around 10 text messages to Lexi, but she didn't receive a reply from her. So she figured maybe Lexi had just fallen asleep. So then she sent her one more text message telling her to make sure that she got paid and to come home right in the morning. But the next morning, Lexi didn't come home. Dawn tried calling and texting, but obviously wasn't getting any sort of reply here. So she was worried. So she drove over to the Millerbergs' house to see what was going on. Now, Dawn had met Dia before, but this was the very first time that she met Eric, and she got bad vibes from him right away. Like I said, he was just kind of this scary-looking guy. He was tall, muscular, a big bushy beard, tattoos everywhere. He even had a teardrop tattoo under one eye, which is a popular prison tattoo that can have multiple different meanings. So Dawn questioned Eric and Dia about where Lexi was, and they said that they had no idea. They said that when they came home around 11:30 p.m., Lexi was the one who left, not them. Lexi said that she had been texting her guy friend all night and that she was going to go meet him at a nearby elementary school. Dawn knew the friend that they were talking about, so Dawn found his number and she called him. He said that yes, he and Lexi were texting each other all night, but they never met up with one another. The last time that he texted her was around 12:30 a.m. on September 11th, but he hadn't seen her at all the day that she went to babysit. So as you can imagine, Dawn was even more worried at this point, and she decided to call the police. At this point, Dawn thought that maybe Lexi had probably just run away. I mean, after all, she had done it before, even though it was staying with friends. I mean, maybe that must be what's happening again here. But there was also a part of Dawn that was telling her that something more sinister had happened. In the past, when Lexi had run away or threatened to run away, she would actually tell her mom where she was going. She would also pack a bag with clothing, other essential items like that, but this time neither one of those things happened. So Dawn was just hoping for the best case scenario, like most people do in these situations. But when she called the police, they treated Lexi's disappearance like a teen runaway case. The police first started their search by questioning the Millerbergs. They told the police a story similar to the one that they had just told Dawn. Lexi had left to go meet with a friend. Except this time they said that she left around 10 p.m. and that they had no idea where she went. Police also questioned the boy that Lexi supposedly went to go and meet. But again, he denied ever seeing Lexi that night. In fact, Lexi's friends weren't very helpful to the authorities altogether. They were all scared to talk to the police, and like I said earlier, Lexi did hang out with a bit of a rougher crowd, you could say. They were involved in a lot of illegal activities, so naturally they thought that they would get in trouble if they were forthcoming and talking to the police and being so open. But Lexi's friends did want to help out in other ways. So the community rallied together to try to find her. Press conferences were held, Lexi was on the news, candlelight vigils were held in her honor, and flyers for her were everywhere. They had been posted all around town. But weeks passed, and they weren't any closer to finding Lexi. Many people had called the police and reported sightings of Lexi, but the reports never led to anything. Lexi was nowhere to be found, and people started to suspect that maybe something more sinister had happened to her. Now, Dawn, in particular, had this gut feeling that Lexi wasn't actually alive anymore. And that feeling just intensified when she ran into Dia Millerberg at the grocery store. This was weeks after Lexi's disappearance also. Dia was just talking to Dawn like nothing had happened, like they were just two old friends catching up. She never even asked Dawn about Lexi. And that made Dawn's fears and her suspicions of the Millerbergs grow tremendously. And she wasn't the only one. Police also thought that something was definitely off with the Millerbergs. They had questioned them several times, and something just seemed weird. Eric, in particular, got very defensive during police interviews. He kept telling the police that he wasn't Lexi's father, so why should he know where she was? And Eric also said that a 16-year-old can do whatever they want, so if Lexi wanted to run away, let her run away. Now, I have to say, that is a pretty ridiculous sentiment, and it made the police even more suspicious of Eric and Dia, but, I mean, do you? Plus, Lexi's friend Brenna decided to also come forward and start giving the police more information about Lexi's relationship with this couple, with the Millerbergs. Brenna said that Lexi got more than just weed and alcohol from Eric and Dia. They gave Lexi meth, heroin, Xanax, and they even paid her in drugs in exchange for babysitting their kids. Brenna said that Lexi was a pretty frequent user of the drugs too, and that Eric had even taught her how to smoke meth out of a light bulb. I mean, very alarming and very unsettling as a parent myself. However, police weren't expecting what Brenna would say next. Not only did Eric and Dia sell Lexi drugs, but they also requested to have a threesome with her. You heard that right, guys. A middle-aged couple, well, not middle-aged, I guess in their 30s, but, older couple, old enough, was asking a teenager to have sex with them. Which, how disgusting can you get? In Utah, the age of consent is technically 16 years old, yes, but I think that we can all agree that a 16-year-old does not truly have the capacity to consent to sex with a nearly 40-year-old couple. Certainly not. Plus, they were also selling Lexi hard drugs, so who can say that Lexi was even in the right state of mind to understand what was going on? The word that comes to mind in my mind is grooming. Grooming. You're feeding them these drugs, you're pumping them with all of this stuff, you're acting like the cool house, the party house. Hey, just hang out here, spend the night here, babysit my kids, take a hit of this, let me show you how to do this. Hey, by the way, we like you, you're pretty, come into the bedroom, we want to have a threesome with you. It makes me sick to my stomach. Now, by the time that Lexi disappeared, Brenna said that Lexi was going to Eric and Dia's house 2 to 3 times a week, and not just for drugs, but now for sex. And sometimes they would even meet up at hotels. And Brenna said that she suspected Eric as soon as Lexi disappeared. Brenna hadn't heard from Lexi all morning on Sunday, September 11th, so she went over to Eric's house and she confronted him. But Eric told her that he hadn't hurt Lexi, that he had nothing to do with her disappearance, and that he would never, ever, ever lay a finger on her. But as time went on, and Lexi was nowhere to be found, Brenna started to think that Eric was lying. So Eric and Dia quickly became the main people of interest in this case, and the police started to look into them even more. And it turns out that Eric was never really a good guy. He had been in and out of prison from 1997 to 2006. He had a rap sheet a mile long, and he had been arrested for numerous things like burglary, unlawful discharge of a firearm, failure to stop at the command of a police officer, and so on. I mean, checkered past, to say the least. And even worse, Eric was a member of a white supremacist gang called the Silent Aryan Warriors. He had multiple tattoos affiliated with this group, and his nickname in the group was Rooster because of his bright red hair. So things are starting to look a little bit questionable, right, to say the least. But there was also no indication that Lexi had run away. Her friends hadn't seen her, her family hadn't heard from her. The last people to have seen Lexi was this drug-dealing white supremacist couple who was grooming this girl, feeding her drugs in exchange for sex, allegedly. I mean, it was not good. So investigators finally now accepted that they were likely no longer looking for a runaway teenager. They were more than likely probably looking for a body. Then, on October 7th, about a month after Lexi disappeared, both Dia and Eric were arrested. But it wasn't for Lexi's disappearance. Dia, who was a nurse, was arrested for prescription fraud. Eric was on probation from a credit card fraud incident from 2010, and he failed to pass a drug test, and he tested positive for OxyContin and for heroin. He claimed he needed the drugs because he was in pain from an old surgery, but ultimately he was sent to prison for 5 years for violating his probation. Then, just days later, on October 9th, police received a warrant to search the Millerberg home. They never stated what they were looking for, but they were seen by neighbors leaving the house with multiple bags of evidence. Meanwhile, the police investigation of Lexi's disappearance was continuing, but they weren't getting any closer to actually finding out what exactly happened to her or where she was. But that would all change when 2 of Eric's fellow gang members came forward to the police. One man's name was Eric Peanut Smith. He said that Eric had contacted him on the night of Lexi's disappearance. Eric told Peanut to come to his house to bring a car and not to ask any questions. However, Peanut ended up not going to Eric's house that night, but he went there on Monday, September 12th, the very next day. When Peanut arrived at the house, Eric told him that he needed his help moving a body. He said that Lexi had overdosed at their house on the night of September 10th, and that Eric and Dia had dumped her body in the woods right off of the highway. Peanut asked Eric why they hadn't just called the police, and Eric said that he wasn't going to go back to prison and that Dia was also worried about losing the kids. Eric was also worried that Lexi's body wasn't deep enough in the forest and that somebody would find her. So, Peanut and Eric drove to the area where Lexi's body was dumped. It was off I-84 near the Weber River, and her body was behind some foliage, but not hidden very well. So they decided to move her body a little bit further back, and they even tried digging a grave. The ground, however, was too rocky, so they just placed Lexi's body in a trash bag and then they left. Now, this second gang member who went to the police said that Eric had told him what happened, but that he refused to help once he learned this crime involved a teenage girl. Instead, the man went to his attorney, who then went to the police. Peanut eventually took the investigators to the area where Lexi's body was dumped, and at this point, it was October 18th. And Lexi had been missing for about 5 weeks. Now, what investigators found was truly horrifying. It was the body of a teenage girl, folded in the fetal position, partially stuffed in a trash bag. And the body was so badly decomposed that it was hard to identify if it was actually Lexi or not. However, the neon-colored toenail polish, the jewelry, and the jawline made all of the officers think that it was Lexi. They had been looking at so many pictures of Lexi for so long they felt like they could identify her anywhere. Police did tell the public that they had found a body, but they didn't say if it was Lexi or not.
Police found a body in Morgan County yesterday that may be a missing Ogden teenage girl. 11 News reporter Julianne Horsley went to North Ogden, where the police say they are still investigating.
A tip led police to the grave, and they're questioning if the remains are of missing teen Alexis Rasmussen. Police expected to identify the body yesterday, but it turned out to be more complicated than they thought.
Friends and loved ones gathered on the steps at the North Ogden Police Department, waiting to hear of any news regarding their best friend Alexis Rasmussen. Police found a body in Morgan County, and the thought of it being Alexis's brings anxiety to our loved ones. Police are looking into suspects but aren't identifying any. At first, they questioned Eric and Dia Millerberg, who police recently arrested for unrelated drug charges. But to Alexis's loved ones, what's important is to find out if their friends
This morning. I love her more than anything, and it just broke my heart to find out that it's really big possibilities that it could be her.
We want to know. It's really hard to sit here and wait and not be able to know where your friend is.
While friends of Alexis waited to hear the latest from police, they shared their favorite memories they had of their missing friend.
Hanging out at the skate park all the time. That's where we all hung out, just hanging out.
We went up to Pineview Dam once, and it was so fun. Like, we went on the swing. They had the tire swing, and it was really fun, and we just spent all day there.
Police are not commenting while they wait for the medical examiner to identify the body. They say they will notify the public when they have more details on the investigation.
The medical examiner hasn't identified the body yet, so police won't release any information today. They say they don't know how long it will take for the coroner to finish up. Janae?
Meanwhile, the body was sent right away to confirm the identity, and the fingerprints and the dental records were used to identify it. And 4 days later, on October 22nd, the police confirmed that they had found Lexi. They officially announced that Dia and Eric were the #1 suspects in this case, in her death. Lexi's body was also sent to the medical examiner to receive a full autopsy. Now, there was no outward trauma to her body, and investigators didn't think that she died of natural causes, but they were now treating this case like it was a homicide. While they didn't think that Eric and Dia meant to kill Alexis, if they had been giving her drugs, it could be considered negligent homicide. Meanwhile, other inmates who were in prison with Eric at the time also came forward to the police, because supposedly, Eric was openly talking about killing Lexi. One inmate recalled a time where Eric said, quote, "I hope it hurries up and snows before hunting season." So, in other words, he wanted Lexi's body to be covered in snow so that hunters would be less likely to find her. He also referred to himself as Watcher of the Flock. See, Eric felt that it was his duty to introduce teens to drugs. He said that teenagers were going to do drugs anyway, so they might as well do it with somebody who could help them, which I don't know how this makes any sense. It is absolutely insane to me. It's like, No, you probably don't teach a 16-year-old how to use a light bulb to smoke drugs. Probably not. If they're going to figure it out on their own, let them figure it out on their own. So the investigators searched the Millerberg home multiple times, and they found a spot in the house where there had been some carpet that had been deliberately removed. And they also found blood stains that were covering the subfloor where that carpet was missing. Investigators also took 2 different cars from the home. They were hoping to find evidence to prove that Eric and Dia had driven Lexi's body to the area where she was dumped. And while they were waiting for those results, eventually the results of Lexi's autopsy came back. They showed that Lexi had 7 times the lethal dose of methamphetamine in her system, along with other drugs like heroin. The medical examiner said that Lexi had to have taken these drugs on the night of Saturday, September 10th, and that Lexi likely died hours later on September 11th. And I think we can safely assume that we know where Lexi got these drugs from, right? Eric and Dia. But what happened that led Lexi to having so many different drugs in her system and those amounts of drugs? Well, police were wondering the exact same thing. But Eric wasn't talking at all. He was acting like he was totally surprised that they had found Lexi dead. He said he genuinely thought that she ran away, that she was alive this whole time. He had no idea how she died. But Dia, on the other hand, she ended up telling investigators everything. Dia said that she had picked up Lexi on September 10th. Originally, they really planned on having Lexi babysit while they went out to go buy things for their daughter's birthday. But they ended up skipping that altogether, and they just hung out with Lexi instead. One of Lexi's friends came over for a little while too because they wanted to buy $100 worth of pills and weed from Dia. So Dia said that they had been hanging out with Lexi a lot since they had met in the spring of 2011. At first, Lexi bought some weed from them, but then in the summer, Dia said that Lexi requested harder drugs. She wanted this couple to teach her how to take meth and how to take heroin. Dia also claimed that in August, Lexi asked if she could have sex with Dia and Eric. Dia said that they agreed and that a sexual relationship between the 3 of them started. But I think that we all know that this is 2 grown adults taking advantage of a highly vulnerable teenager, and it wasn't a relationship at all. It was an assault. So anyway, on the night of September 10th, the kids were put to bed, and then Eric asked Dia and Lexi if they wanted to get high. They said yes, so Eric prepared 3 syringes of H. Dia injected herself in the bathroom, while Eric injected himself and then Lexi. Then apparently, while high, Dia and Lexi drove 30 minutes to a local 24-hour Walgreens. They're seen on the security footage at 10:20 p.m. walking into the store and filling a prescription for painkillers. Then they left the store, they drove around for a little bit, purchased more drugs somewhere else, and then they headed back to the house. They got back around midnight, and Eric said that he had meth and had prepared 3 more syringes. Dia injected herself, and she said that she watched as Eric injected Lexi in the neck and then injected himself. And it isn't too common, though, for people to inject themselves with meth in the neck. It's usually done when the veins in the arm are ruined and as like a last-ditch effort, and it's a particularly dangerous method as well. The drug hits you faster, it's more likely to be lethal, it's just not good, not a good idea. Not that any of it's a good idea, but you know what I mean. Now, Dia wasn't sure why Eric injected Lexi in the neck, but apparently she seemed fine. And Lexi apparently said that it was the highest that she had ever been. And then she asked the couple to have sex with her. She said they tried for a while, but eventually stopped because they were all too high. Eric then prepared 3 more syringes and injected Lexi again. Because why not, right? I mean, apparently you haven't had enough yet. But soon after that shot, Lexi started saying that she was cold. She was shaking, disoriented, and she was panicking because it was obviously way too much and she was having a very bad reaction. So Dia then led Lexi to the bathroom and she prepared her a warm bath. Lexi sat in the bath for about 45 minutes, but when Dia checked on her, she was still cold. So she took Lexi out of the bath, she wrapped her in a blanket, and she had her lie down on their bed. Meanwhile, Dia and Eric went outside to go smoke a cigarette. And when they came back in, 30 minutes later, Lexi was still in the bed, but she wasn't responsive. She wasn't breathing, and there was also mucus coming out the right side of her mouth. Now, since Dia was a licensed nurse, she says she tried to revive Lexi with CPR, but that it didn't work. So now the couple panicked. Eric was saying he couldn't go back to prison, and they were both worried about losing their kids, so they talked about calling the police, but Eric refused. So Dia got Lexi dressed, placed her body in a trunk, and then they put her in the trunk of the back seat of their car and they took off. And they left their 6-year-old at home alone and took the baby with them. They drove all around town looking for a place to hide the body, and they eventually decided on that remote area near I-84. They found a spot, they dug a shallow hole, and they placed Lexi's body in the grave. Then they covered it with a blanket. They then drove around town until they found a random dumpster. They threw away Lexi's purse and the trunk that they had used to put her body in. Then they drove to another dumpster and they took the carpet out from the back of their car. They threw that away because they didn't want to leave any evidence in the car. And then Eric even sold the car weeks later, thinking they were getting away with the perfect disposal, the perfect crime. And although Dia had come forward and confessed, she was trying to put all the blame on Eric. She said that he was the one who injected Lexi with those drugs. And Dia was also putting some of the blame on Lexi. She was saying that Lexi asked for the drugs, Lexi asked for sex, Lexi asked to hang out with them. But again, Lexi was 16 years old. So if Lexi was really asking for those things, it's up to the adult in the situation to refuse. Police ended up being able to track down the person who bought the car from Eric, and they found that it was missing the carpet in the back, just like Dia had said. So finally, in early 2012, Eric and Dia were officially charged with Lexi's death. Dia was charged with desecrating a body, obstructing justice, and illegally obtaining drugs. Eric was charged with what's called child physical assault homicide. He was also charged with obstruction of justice, unlawful sexual activity with a minor, and abuse and desecration of a human body. Dia, who agreed to testify against Eric in the trial, ended up receiving a plea deal. She posted bail and she went to go be with family in Wyoming while she awaited trial. And during all of this, she was trying to regain custody of her kids and had filed for a divorce from Eric. But when Eric found out that Dia was going to testify against him, he completely flipped out. He contacted members of his gang and he asked them to kill Dia, but they all refused. Eric also changed the Dia tattoo on his neck that he had to say death instead. The trial was set to start in 2014, but in July of 2013, Eric ended up being attacked in prison by his cellmate. He was stabbed over 25 times. Most of the wounds were superficial, and he was taken to receive treatment. Then he was back in his cell just 24 hours later. But it was interesting because a sharp piece of metal had been found in the cell, and Eric's cellmate ended up being charged with attempted murder. Now, Eric was likely attacked because he had killed a kid, and it isn't uncommon for people who harm children to be attacked in jail. So his trial was still moving forward, and Eric's trial began in early 2014. His appearance had drastically changed by the time of his trial. He had shaved his beard, he had styled his hair, he was wearing a suit that covered up all of his tattoos, and he pleaded not guilty. And of course, his defense team was trying to argue that Dia was the one who injected Lexi and was the one who ultimately caused her death. Eric didn't testify during his trial, but Dia did. And she told the exact same story that she told the investigators. Lexi's friend Brenna also testified during the trial, and she told the history of how Lexi met Dia and Eric. She said that they did drugs with the couple multiple times. Eric and Dia paid Lexi in drugs for babysitting, and they went to parties at their house all the time. Prison inmates and former gang members also testified against Eric too. So a jury ended up finding him guilty on all charges, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Dia's trial was months later, and she pleaded guilty as a part of her plea deal. She said that she was absolutely disgusted by what she had done, and she was sentenced to just 5 years in prison.
Your Honor, can I?
You may address the audience, Ms. Smith.
I just want to say that I am appalled and disgusted by what I've done. I've hurt your family in a way I can't fix. You're in my prayers, and I hope one day you'll be able to forgive me, and that God will bring me peace. Your Honor, I'm not going to make excuses for what I've done. I think it would only make things worse. I have no way to express the magnitude of grief that I feel for Alexis' family for what I've done. But I take her
Millerberg, as you can probably tell from where I've headed, I do think that prison is the appropriate sentence in this particular situation. I realize that 3 years of allowing you to rebuild and your family and everything of that nature, and then to come in and say, okay, Judge, you're going to destroy that. But I take these cases as I find them to be. I didn't have any control that it took 3 years to bring this to trial. I have to balance society's the need for punishment, the need for rehabilitation, and I know defendants get tired of this, but with all due respect, Ms. Millerberg, sometimes it's not about the defendant. I know you have needs, I know you have children, I know you have families, but sometimes, you do such acts that are such extreme and so heinous and depraved, burying this young girl's body and hiding it from the police. You've got to balance that, and you have to put it all in perspective. It's going to be the order and sentence of the court that you're to serve 3 indeterminate terms at the Utah State Prison of 0 to 5 years. I will recommend that they run concurrent. I will recommend that you get credit for all time served, which I show to be approximately 62 days. I do agree that there is restitution. I will recommend to the Board of Pardons that there be $12,078.75 in restitution that they should consider at any time that you are paroled. I'm going to leave it to the Board of Pardons as to whether or not it should be joint or several. I will say one other comment for the record. I would have run the drug charge 0 to 5. I would have run the other 2 charges consecutive. But I agreed up front when I took this plea that I would honor the agreement to run them concurrently. And that's what I've done today. That will be all. Thank you. The cash bail may be exonerated and returned to the people who posted it. Anything further? No, Your Honor. We'll be in recess.
Dia was set to be released in 2019, but she appeared before a parole board in 2018. She claimed that she felt guilty about Lexi's death, and apparently she did meet the conditions of an early release. So she was released on parole in October of 2018, which, how ridiculous is that, guys? Because already the 5-year sentence, in my opinion, was way too lenient. But this is a grown woman, a full-grown adult, who helped provide a minor with drugs, sexually assaulted her, in my opinion, disposed of her body, and she was only in prison for 4 years? How does that equate? How does that make any sense? Lexi's family has talked about how much her death has impacted them, and they said that Lexi, like I said in the beginning, was truly just a shining star, that she would have had the absolute ability to change the world before her life was cut short, so senselessly, so tragically. So because of this, they started an organization called Lexi's Legacy. It raises money for kids who are struggling with drug addiction. Now, unfortunately, there was a lot of victim blaming going on in this case. There were people who genuinely didn't think that Eric or Dia should be held responsible. They thought that Lexi was making bad choices that ultimately led to her own death. But again, Lexi was 16 years old. I think some people really forget how easily influenced teenagers are. They aren't making the best decisions, and they don't know how those decisions will affect their future. So why should they be held responsible when adults are taking advantage of them? There's also the argument that their brains aren't even fully developed yet. So who's to say what decisions really are their own and are done of, I don't want to say free will, but that aren't manipulated or controlled in some sort of way? And it's actually a pretty interesting debate because we've talked about how that same argument has been used to excuse the actions of teenagers when they murder somebody. So I would love to know what you guys think in all of this. In the case of Lexi, 2 adults, full stop, were actively encouraging her bad behaviors. Grooming her could even be argued in this. They were providing her with the means to get high, the opportunity to make bad choices, and it could be argued, did she even make the decisions that she made herself? Or was she completely taken advantage of? To me, it definitely seems like the latter, and I also have to question, I know that Dia was saying that Lexi's the one who propositioned them for sex. Maybe it's true, but I think it's way more likely that they were propositioning her and that it was in exchange for the drugs. That was the payment, but I don't know. That's just where my mind goes. What do you think? What do you make about all of this? Do you think that it was accidental? Do you think that they loved getting her high because then they could play with her like a toy and they could do whatever they wanted? Leave your thoughts below in the comment section. I'm curious to know what you guys think. Also, what do you make of Dia's sentence? Because I personally think it was far too light. And the fact that she's out on the street again, as a proven predator gives me a lot of pause. As a parent, as a human being, as a once teenager, I mean, it does not sit right with me. So let me know what you guys think. I know that this one was definitely a difficult one to hear, but I really do appreciate you hearing Lexi's story. I think it's not only important so that her voice can carry through and live on, but also to serve as a reminder if you're a teenager, if you have teenagers, please, please, please be careful with who you surround yourself with and be very, very careful when it comes to drugs. I know people will try alcohol here and there, light drugs here and there, maybe hard drugs here and there. Not always, but sometimes. Just be cautious because it is very scary and you never know what's going to be starting as something fun you might think, or testing it and just dabbling in it, seeing what it's like. It could end disastrously, catastrophically, I mean, fatally. So please just rethink it before you decide you want to tap into that whole world, because it is a very dark and slippery slope. All right, guys, thanks again. And until the next one, stay safe. Bye.